So I am very much not a morning person. When Claudio asked me if I would move my talk to today, I said that was fine as long as I didn't have to go first thing in the morning. I struggle with that. I'm an extrovert. I need to talk to people first before I can really get going on things. And I'm also from the United States, from Ohio, which about 5 months out of the year is a cold and miserable place. And so a few years back, it was a December morning, and I remember waking up, and I was tired, I had a sore throat, I wasn't feeling good, and I really did not want to drag myself into work. But I kind of chalked it up to I had been traveling that weekend, and so I was just too tired. So I went into work, and as the day progressed, I started to feel sicker and sicker. But I had a big project due. I'm sure we can all relate to that. And so what happened is that the next day, I tried to call in sick. I tried to take a sick day, but my so-called sick day looked like me laying on my couch in a blanket and answering phone calls and Slack messages and sending emails trying to get this project done. And that led me to the cycle where from almost the entire month of December of 2015, I would try to take time off work and not be able to. So I would just force myself to go through work and force myself to do what I thought my boss needed me to do. Well, that all resulted into what had started as a cold turning into bronchitis and then into pneumonia. And that January, I was due to present a workshop at a conference. And a week before the conference, I was on a heavy dose of steroids and antibiotics and just trying to get myself better to give this talk. And so I tell myself, this isn't okay. I cannot push myself this way to the point where I'm harming myself. And so I make a vow, like many of us do, in January, right? It's New Year's resolution time, and everybody wants to be healthier, and everybody wants to be better. And so for me personally, I decided I was going to try to take better care of my physical health. But, as often happens, I wound up just getting very busy that month, and that didn't work out. And as I went through that month, and as I went through that journey, I really started to think about a lot of things that are problems in our industry around healthcare. And I decided that not only did I want to start taking better care of myself, but I also wanted to help others know that it's okay to talk about health issues, and it's okay to talk about mental health, and I wanted to bring these conversations in the open. And so that's why I stand on stages today and say, hi, my brain doesn't work, let's talk about it. It works, but it doesn't work right. So I'm trying to be a good New Year's resolution person and go into the new year taking care of myself, but I wound up having a project that was due. And I find myself one cold, snowy January morning, I'm chugging coffee, I have people stopping by my desk every few minutes, I was a recruiter at the time, and I had constant pings from my hiring managers, and I just couldn't get anything done. And I was just so overwhelmed and so distracted. And so, in kind of a moment of desperation, I sent a text to one of my friends. And they said that their day was very crazy and disorganized, but it wasn't stressful. And I said that I was so stressed out that day that I was just going to turn into a hermit because people are exhausting to me. And because nobody would need my emotional support or paperwork. And for me, so I'm an extrovert, which means that I draw energy from people, from being around people. And helping people be better at their jobs and helping communities is my true passion. And so for me to get to a point where my mental state was so bad that I didn't want to be around people, I knew that something needed to change. And I knew that I really needed to take my own physical and mental health more seriously. So what got me to that point where I was just completely burnt out? Well, I was working a lot. I was spending a lot of time just sitting down at my computer, having a very sedentary lifestyle. I had all of these demands on my times. I was writing a workshop, I was staffing for a high-priority project, I was running a conference, I had a lot of side projects going on, and I was trying to do everything for everybody. And everything was on fire. It didn't matter what the priority was, it felt like every 5 minutes something else was a bigger priority because we were in this stage of growth. And because of all that, my diet was a lot of pizza, a lot of just not properly taking care of myself, and it all led me to feel like this. Now, does this sound familiar? Because this is how a lot of us in our industry are. And we've come to a point where this is normal, and this is expected, and we're just expected to sacrifice everything about ourselves for the sake of getting our code written and getting our work done. But we don't need to do that. We should not be sacrificing our health, our happiness, and our relationships for the sake of our jobs, our money, and our success. As a matter of fact, if we're taking better care of our health, our happiness, and relationships, we are actually going to be more successful and more productive, and that's a lot of what we're going to focus on today. But first, we want to talk a little bit about how, when our habits aren't so healthy, it can affect us. So, physically, when we start to get very stressed out, when we start to take less good care of ourselves, we can gain weight, our immunity actually gets lower, so we're more prone to get sick, and I think that's part of why I just couldn't recover that month. Like I found in times when I'm very stressed out, I don't feel as well, and I don't perform as well. I'm sure we've all had, headaches and shoulder tension and neck tension. Again, that's physical impacts of being stressed out. And then, ironically, you wind up missing work or underperforming at work, therefore actually performing worse than you could be. And mentally, when our habits aren't as healthy, we can just feel hopeless. We can feel stressed. We can feel burnt out. And especially during the pandemic, there's been a lot of talk about burnout. And sometimes we shut ourselves down, we shut ourselves away from other people, and sometimes even lead to more destructive acts if we don't take proper care of ourselves. And so, even more scarily, though, than that, is that a lot of those things, when we don't take care of ourselves, we can actually cause chronic illnesses on ourselves. And chronic illnesses are things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure. And those things account for 70% of deaths, 86% of healthcare costs in the US. I couldn't find those stats for here. And the thing is that these are some of the most preventable diseases if we take the right steps to care for ourselves. So when we're not taking care of ourselves physically, how does it affect us? We're less productive, right? You're very tired, so you maybe can't focus, you can't get your work done. Maybe you're a little crankier, maybe you're snapping at people or you're upset, and that can affect a team too. Sometimes one negative person can impact a team negatively. And we all have bad days, but when it becomes a constant thing, it's actually going to affect you. And if you're not producing and you're not pleasant to work with, you're not going to grow your career. So this links directly to career success. So how do we go about improving our physical health? Well, we focus on 3 different areas: food, exercise, and sleep. And the key about this is just to consistently make an effort to eat better, be more active, and do the things we need to do for our health. Now, this doesn't have to be big. I'm not saying go out and train for a marathon and become a gluten-free vegan. That's not my jam. If that's what you want to do, you do you. But it doesn't have to be dramatic. So instead, today, we're going to focus on small daily lifestyle changes you can make that add up over time and make you feel better. So the first thing is when it comes to food. I love this quote from Michael Pollan. It says, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." And the point here is that no food is good or evil. Food is just food, it's delicious, it's something to be enjoyed with our friends and our family, but we need to eat the right kinds of food and mix that stuff in with all of the, yummy desserts and cheeseburgers and things we also might like to eat. And at the time I was doing this talk, I worked for a consulting company that hosted about 15 meetups a month. So our office had all sorts of snacks and food like you would find in a convenience store. So there was all this junk food around. And then because I was a recruiter, a lot of my job is very social. I have things like happy hours and lunches and long conference days where it's my literal job to be out socializing with people. And so if I wasn't careful, I would have a day where my lunch could be, pizza and a Coke Zero, and then dinner is vodka and chicken wings, because that's what we were having at the event. And those foods are yummy, and they're okay to eat all the time, but when it becomes that consistent and that chronic, and you're not eating kind of more whole, nourishing foods, you actually become less healthy. So how can we improve our eating habits at work? There's a lot of different things we can do, and with working from home flexibility, we actually have more options now, but a lot of this focuses on people who are in traditional offices. So I know people who will do like food prep on the weekends, and there's whole cookbooks and websites you can buy about the idea is you cook a bunch of food at the beginning of the week, and then you have it ready to do through the rest of the week. So I do this a little bit to some extent, like I'll cook maybe some meat or something and chop up some vegetables, so when it's the end of the day, instead of ordering DoorDash, I'll just throw together something because most of the prep work is done, and I just need to put it together and eat it. I try to have a balance at meals. So if I'm going to have dessert, I might not eat French fries. If I'm going to have a cheeseburger for one meal, I might eat a salad for the next or something. Just eating a variety of foods is actually one of the best things we can do for our nutrition. And of course, part of this depends on how your body is and your own dietary restrictions. So I'm not here to tell you one right way to do things. I'm just here to give you, suggestions, and you arrive at what works best for you. And the other thing is, how many of us are guilty of sitting at our desks during lunch and working through lunch? Yeah. We shouldn't be doing that. Not if we don't have to. When I worked in an office, the reason there's a die up here is because when I worked in an office, my consultants and I would actually get together and play board games at lunchtime. Now that I work from home, I'll maybe play a video game, maybe I'll walk my dogs, I'll go and I'll do something, maybe I'll take a nap, but I'll make it a point to step away from my desk for a minute and eat and take care of myself rather than sitting and working through lunch. Because honestly, when I'm working through lunch, I'm very distracted anyway, and I'm not getting anything done. I keep losing my place, so I found it's better to take that 20, 30 minutes and step away and have lunch. And that all kind of makes me feel better physically from a diet standpoint. Love this meme. Does running late count as exercise? So I am a runner, on and off a runner. And I do like to exercise, and when my broken foot recovers, and I get back into running, I know that my mornings will go one of two ways. Either I'll wake up in the morning, that alarm will go off too early, and not a morning person, and I'll be hating myself and cursing myself for the first 15 minutes, how stupid it is I'm up at 6 o'clock in the morning when I could sleep another hour. But then as I get going, I put on some music, I'm dancing around, I'm stretching, and by the end of the exercise, I actually feel a lot more energized. On the days that I don't do that, on the days that I sleep in till the last minute or keep hitting snooze, I feel very stressed. I feel very rushed around. I'm cursing every traffic light that could be stopping me from getting where I need to be, and it just starts my day off on a worse note than if I've taken the time to energize myself somehow in the morning. Now, again, you don't have to be a runner. Whatever exercise or physical activity is right for you, you can do, but this is how you can kind of make those little changes again during the workday. Several little things you can do, things like taking the steps instead of the elevator, parking a little farther away, maybe walking to the store instead of driving. The US is a very car-based society. We don't have options to walk a lot of places, but sometimes, I'll choose to walk. And then just finding, reasons to stand up from my desk, maybe stretch for a minute. I like the Fitbits and Apple Watches that will alert you every once in a while to stand up and stretch and just move yourself around. And the thing that works the best for me is to schedule exercise on the calendar. I recently started taking like aerial silks acrobatic classes, and I love them, but I make sure to put them on my calendar along with any other workouts because then I treat it like any other appointment in my life, and I see my calendar alert that says, go walk your dogs, go for a run, go to class. And if I treat it like an appointment, that actually does happen, and I feel more energized and I feel happier. Want to be a morning person? There's an app for that. It's called an alarm, and it's the worst. So again, I hate mornings. I'm a night owl. If I had my way, I would sleep 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. or something every single day, right? And there's a lot of things that we can do to prioritize and value rest. But the problem is, in our industry, how often do we read stories about maybe the startup founder who only sleeps 4 hours a week, or you're pulling an all-nighter to finish that deployment, or whatever it might be? And the problem with that is that at this point in tech, we almost glorify not sleeping and instead consuming lots of caffeine and whatever else we need to do to keep going. So how can we make sure that we get better rest? Because when we don't get better rest, we have some really there are a lot of bad side effects. One of the reasons it's so important for us to rest is that our body actually functions better. I know for a fact that if I'm overly tired, I can't solve problems as well, I can't communicate as well, I slip up, I drop things, and I forget things. Our bodies physically heal. Our body physically repairs itself. Our nerve systems and things restructure themselves while we're sleeping. So if we're not sleeping enough, we're not giving our body enough time to heal. And like I was saying, I have a broken foot, and I have found this myself, that the weeks that I slept more, my foot actually did feel better, and it's because I was giving it time to heal and not, be on it and using it. It actually helps balance our hormones. When you're sleeping enough, your hormones are balanced, and specifically the hormones that deal with kind of metabolism and sugar regulation. And it increases our safety. People who are driving, who are sleep deprived, are actually as dangerous, if not more, as somebody driving drunk behind the wheel. So it's not just that we like to sleep because we're lazy or we're tired or our beds are comfortable. All of those things can be true, but it's actually safer and healthier for us to prioritize some sleep. So how do you get better sleep? One of the conventional kind of pieces of wisdom is to go to sleep and wake up at the same time every day. And that works for some people. That does not work for me because some days I have to be at work at 6 o'clock in the morning to set up a conference booth and then at an event until 10 or 11 at night. So I just don't have a lifestyle that allows me to do a consistent sleep schedule, but what I do know is I figured out how many hours of sleep I need a night, and I make sure to allow myself time to get the amount of sleep that I need every night. Sleep hygiene is important, and I've admittedly been very bad about this week. We really should not be on our smartphones, our TVs, our switches, anything lighted up at us for a good hour before we go to sleep. The reason is because the spectrum of light that's emitted from those devices actually tells our brains it's still time to wake up. So when I'm being very good about sleep hygiene, I will actually put my phone away about an hour before sleep, and I'll read a paper book, or I'll read on my Kindle, which doesn't have a backlight or anything, or I'll put together a puzzle or a Lego kit, or do something that isn't involving a screen so that my brain starts to relax. And this week, like I said, since I'm at a conference, I've been kind of sloppy about it, and I haven't been sleeping as well. And this morning I thought, no wonder I'm not sleeping as well. I'm staring at my phone till the minute I go to sleep, and so my brain still is overstimulated. And we should avoid caffeine and alcohol and heavy foods too late in the day because, again, those keep you from going to sleep. Alcohol can help you fall asleep, but the sleep that you get isn't necessarily quality. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy my cocktails, but you can't do it every night. And all of that will help you feel a little bit more rested and a little better. So what happens if we're just taking these little steps every day to eat better, to move around a little more, and to rest and relax a little more? We're more productive. We're more alert. We're more aware of what it is that we need to be doing. We're more pleasant to be around. It's easier for us to deal with difficult and challenging situations. And guess what? When you're more productive and you're pleasant to work around, your career can actually grow. But there's a whole other health area that we don't talk about, and there's a lot of stigma about it. And I was talking to somebody just a few minutes ago, and I had been looking to see if there were any kind of government healthcare agencies in the Dominican that deal with kind of mental health. I couldn't find a whole lot about that. The problem is there's a lot of stigma around mental health, and that's why we don't talk about it. But we forget that our physical and mental health are completely tied together. So when we're not healthy physically, our physical health issues, so maybe you have a headache, maybe you have a cold, something like that, it can actually, if I have a headache, my depression can get worse. If I have a headache, I might snap at my partner or something like that. And so when our physical health isn't as good, it's actually affecting the mental aspects and relation aspects of our life. Why is my clicker not working? They also can make things like depression and anxiety worse when we're not feeling as well. Mental health issues can actually increase the risk of physical and relationship problems. If we're struggling with depression, if we're struggling with bipolar, if we're struggling with something, it actually affects us physically as well, and it can cause rifts in our relationships with our friends and our family and loved ones. And mental health problems affect our human behavior and our human interactions in and out of the workplace. Now, nearly 1 in 5 adults has a mental illness, and this survey is from before the pandemic. Post-pandemic, this stats are closer to 25, almost 30%, and even higher for tech specifically. We'll get to that in a minute. So that means that if you're on a team of 5 people, there's a chance that at least one of those people is struggling with a mental illness. It's not as rare as we want to think, and it's not always obvious. I have depression, anxiety, and ADHD. And you could maybe guess the ADHD part by looking at me, because I'm colorful and I'm loud and I'm hyper. But you're not going to think that the colorful, loud, hyper person struggles with depression and has days that she doesn't want to get out of bed, and days when she's struggling to do the simplest tasks, like change out of her pajamas. But I do, and that's another problem, is that you can't see a mental illness the way you can maybe see a physical disability. So what is a mental illness? What is the definition of it? It affects how we think, how we behave, and how we feel. We can have the same diagnosis and different experiences. One of my conference besties and I do a co-presentation on neurodiversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And we both struggle with anxiety disorder, but around different things. His is around health issues, and mine is around like loss anxiety. So even though we have the same diagnosis, we have the same disorder, it shows up differently in different people. There are a lot of things that cause this, and it's usually more than one factor. So I have people in my family who have mental illnesses as well, and so I know it's partially genetic. It's partially biochemical. Your brain's just not making the chemicals it needs to regulate your emotions. But sometimes you have that tendency, and then a traumatic life event happens, and it comes to the forefront. And that's what happened to me, is I reached a point where my life was just completely falling apart, and I was having an increasingly hard time, especially with the cold winter months, and those life events caused my occasional sad days to turn into full-blown depression. And then also your environment can contribute to this. You know, maybe you're in a country that's got a lot of political strife going on. That's, of course, going to increase your anxiety. I live in America. It's a mess over there right now, and that environment also is contributing to things like anxiety and depression. So there's a couple different causes for it. The important thing is that recovery is possible. You can, in fact, recover from mental illnesses, and the process of recovering and treating a mental illness is actually not that much different than the process of treating a physical illness. So what happens when we have poor mental health? Well, when I'm having ADHD, struggles, and I'm forgetting meetings, and I'm forgetting to take phone calls, when I'm anxious and stressed and depressed and cranky, I'm less productive. I just can't get things done because I'll get so in my head worrying about doing the thing correctly that I won't actually do the thing, and then I'm scrambling and I'm behind. Morale is lower. I am less fun to be around, I'm less pleasant to work with if I'm not taking care of my own mental health. And just like in the case of physical health, when you're not as productive and your morale isn't as good, you aren't going to grow as much professionally. So if you think that you or a loved one has a mental illness, there are some ways that you can maybe tell. So these are some possible warning signs. Excessive worry, and worrying sometimes about things that don't seem rational, like maybe I'm standing up here worrying that the stage is going to collapse under me. That's kind of extreme, but it is a symptom of some mental illnesses. Frequent mood swings. We all have bad days. We all have good days. We all have moods that change. That's normal and that's human. But when that's happening regularly, there might be a problem. Trouble doing work, trouble focusing, trouble communicating. And again, we all have those moments. I know I have moments all the time when I have trouble communicating, but it happens. Avoiding social situations. When I was talking at the beginning, this was me, I started avoiding social situations. And I know that in general, I'm not in a good mental state when I start not wanting to go out with my friends and not wanting to have fun and not doing the things that I enjoy. And changes in our biological habits as well, whether that's sleeping patterns, eating patterns, maybe physical things. The thing about all of this is that these are also all things we deal with every single day. And so it's not necessarily a question of, oh, I woke up in a bad mood today, or, oh, I screwed up in a meeting or whatever. It's when this becomes consistent and starts to affect our life, that's when you might need to talk to a doctor. I forgot, substance abuse is another one that sometimes people will turn to when mental health isn't so good. So how do we treat mental illnesses? You get a diagnosis. So when I was diagnosed with depression, what happened is I realized that it was just beyond me being sad about it being winter, sad about it being cold, or sad about it being stressed. I realized there was something more when it became the springtime, and no matter how much I ran and how much yoga I did and how many of the things I love to do I did, I still just felt sad and hopeless and helpless. You arm yourself with some knowledge. So you go to the doctor. I went to my doctor and talked to him, and he gave me some knowledge, and I was already somewhat knowledgeable about this information, but I did some research on this topic and learned more about it. And then maybe you need some medication. I take depression medication, I take ADHD medication. I'm perfectly comfortable sharing that with people because I know that I actually feel better when I take my medication. And I also go to therapy. I somewhat literally owe my therapist my life because I was getting into a very dark place where I needed a therapist. I needed somebody to talk me through the problems in addition to helping my brain chemicals balance themselves back. And you learn certain behaviors. And that was one that I learned early on with the ADHD part of myself, was that one of my ADHD behaviors, kind of to treat it, is that I live and die by my calendar and my planner. Because if it's not in the planner and it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist to me. So you learn your behaviors, you learn what to do, you learn how to help yourself. And you need a support system. This would not be a Cassandra Faris talk if I didn't talk about the importance of support systems, community, and having people who care for you around you. But the problem is there's a stigma around mental illness. And again, it's not something you can see, so that's the first piece of why it's a stigma. It's often so-called invisible. You can't tell that, my friend who has anxiety, who's, tall and covered in tattoos and this outgoing, fun guy struggles with, debilitating anxiety. You can't tell just by looking at somebody that they have some sort of a mental illness. And so that makes it harder to understand than somebody in a wheelchair or using a walking cane. There's a fear of the unknown because this stuff is scary and you don't know as much about it, and it's not necessarily as easy to understand as, say, a cold or a migraine or something like that. It's hard to talk about feelings. I still don't necessarily love talking about feelings, and it's something that I've worked on over the past several years to become more comfortable, but it's hard and it's icky and it's vulnerable to talk about our feelings. But what I found is that actually the more I talk about that stuff and the more vulnerable and open I am and the more I purposely put myself out there to discuss this stuff, the better I actually feel. And it helps other people because it makes it okay for them to talk about their feelings. And sometimes, unfortunately, people deal with bullying, or they've had other problems that were related to their mental illnesses, or maybe their parents don't believe it. It could be any number of things. Maybe they're oh, I'm a man, I can't have depression, that's a woman's problem. Like, I've even heard that because there's just all of this pressure to look and act and feel a certain way. So all of these things lead to this horrible stigma around mental illness. And I think it's especially difficult in tech because software developers and technical professionals, we're a very logical bunch of people. We want to see a problem, we want to see a solution, and we want to fix it. And I actually had this problem with a family member in the past where they were super supportive helping me when I would have maybe a migraine because they knew that when I had a migraine, I needed to take some medication and put an ice pack on my head and go to sleep, and I'd feel better in a couple hours. Depression doesn't work like that. The process of recovering depression is not linear, and it takes time and it takes effort, and it's not as easy as just taking a pill and bam, you're better. So how do we help overcome the stigma? First of all, we arm ourselves with knowledge. We talk about this. We understand, and we start to understand why. For instance, I had a coworker who he was constantly missing the stand-up meeting every morning, and it turned out that his depression was actually causing him to miss the stand-up because he couldn't get out of bed in the morning, and the medicine he'd been prescribed hadn't kicked in yet. So you want to have some understanding and some empathy around these things. If you're comfortable about it, which I clearly am, you can talk about your mental illnesses and check in with others who struggle. To this day, one of my favorite things that's come out of me doing these kinds of talks is a friend of mine, Jeremy Sinclair, he's Sinclairinator on Twitter. He was in one of my talks, and it motivated him to actually get an ADHD diagnosis as well and start sharing his experiences. And the reason I'm sharing that is because he's put that out there and more than once publicly thanked me for opening that door to talk to him. And this man is a brilliant software engineer, and I know so many people like that who they've said, oh, well, you talked about it and you made it okay, so now I feel like it's okay to discuss. There's also listening. Just sometimes people, when you're having a bad day, when you're having a rough day, you're not looking for advice and you're not looking solutions. Again, very, very hard for a technology professional because we're problem solvers naturally. We see a problem, we want to solve it. Somebody says something they think they might be a problem, but that's not, maybe they're not looking for a solution. Maybe they're looking for something to talk about. What I do is I actually have several friends now who we have this kind of system where when somebody's having a bad day or somebody's venting, we will ask each other, are you looking for advice or just empathy? And then that way you know if the person wants advice, you can provide it, but if they just want somebody to listen and empathize and be a friend, you know that too, and you're not assuming something that they don't necessarily want. It's also important to know our legal rights around mental health care, around disabilities. I am not going to get into that in great detail here because I'm not knowledgeable about it, but in the US we have certain protections for people who are disabled under what's called the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, and those make you cannot be discriminated against if you have a disability, and depression is considered a disability. You cannot, your employer has to make certain accommodations for you in order to be able to do your job. So you need to know your legal rights that you might have around mental illness as well. And that makes it a little less scary because then you're not worried about, oh, if I have to take an hour off to go to therapy, am I going to lose my job? Because that is protected under the law. There are a lot of resources out there. National Alliance on Mental Illness is a nonprofit that raises awareness of mental illnesses. I could not find the Dominican Republican version of this either, and I guess it doesn't exist, but a lot of countries have kind of a mental health and government program where you can go and you can find that information. And I'm sure there are nonprofits and stuff here that do the same thing. But my favorite mental health resource that's very specific to this audience is, has anybody heard of open sourcing mental health or open sourcing mental illness? All right, everybody needs to check out this website, and here's why. There was a software developer by the name of Ed Finkler, and Ed at one point started talking about his experiences with depression in the workplace as a software developer. And it led him to start this open sourcing mental health organization that actually provides resources that are written specifically to technologists. So they have forums, they have a podcast, they have blog posts, but the really cool thing that they have is they actually have books that you can buy, or that are free books that you can download, and one is for employers, one is for employees, and one is for managers that talk specifically about mental health and meeting the mental health care needs of technologists. The other thing they do is every year they do a mental health and tech survey. And according to their mental health and tech survey, remember how I said earlier it's like 25% of people have a mental illness? Their survey comes back at closer to 35 or 40% of people within the technology industry, which anecdotally, just based on the number of people I know and have talked about, that tracks, that we have a higher incidence of mental illnesses and neurodiversities in our industry. And in some ways, we're drawn to this industry because of that, because it allows us to kind of get into our heads and focus and use our brain power where we want to. So definitely check out Open Sourcing Mental Health. Great, great resource. I absolutely love them. And I've actually learned a lot about them, and I like that they put their language in a way that a technologist will understand. So as I went through everything and I started to feel better, I wound up being more productive. I was getting more things done. I had better morale, and as a result, I increased my professional growth. I was able to move out of recruiting and into community management, which is what I do now. Community managers, what we do is our whole goal is to bring together developers, communities, and products and try to make things better and more effective for everybody. And we do that a lot of different ways, but that allowed me to move into a job that I'm really passionate about and I absolutely love. But we also need to do some other things to take care of ourselves. Whether we're struggling with mental illness, whether we're struggling with physical illness, whether or not we're perfectly healthy, we can do things in our daily lives that help ourselves feel better and healthier overall. So self-care is extremely hard to define without using the words self or care. But it's basically kind little things that you do to make your life better. And there are different types of self-care. There's reflective self-care, and I'm missing the other one right now, sorry. Reflective and kind self-care, that's what it was. But anyway, so for me, for self-care, these are little things that bring joy into your day. So one of my self-care things that I do is when I go to the grocery store every couple weeks, I buy myself a bunch of fresh flowers. Just nothing fancy, just a bunch of flowers from the grocery store produce department. And I put them in my kitchen or in my dining room or somewhere, and then every time I walk by the flowers, it gives me a little smile. And it just brightens my day just a little bit, and that can be especially kind to yourself on a hard day. I'm a big journaler. I journal, there's lots of different ways to journal. For a while, I was using a journal called a diary for good and bad days. And it would give you these little prompts every day where you would record good and bad things that happened. Right now I'm in a phase where I just like stream of consciousness, word vomit on a paper, and just get things out of my head. And sometimes just doing that helps me de-stress. Saying no. I struggle with saying no. I had a manager years and years ago who told me I needed to learn to say no so I didn't overcommit myself. And I've gotten better at it. I've gotten better at, knowing and understanding my boundaries and when it is okay to say no, but it can still feel weird. But saying no to something is really an important part of self-care because it can take away some of the pressures that you might falsely be putting on yourself. And scheduling time for yourself. When I came to this conference, I've been going through a really stressful time. My contract ended unexpectedly, and so I needed to start taking better care of myself. So, for instance, I came to this conference a day early and just took time by the beach. And that'll help you feel a little bit better. We also need to have fun. We need to play. And adults a lot of times like to think that we can't have fun and we can't play anymore. But for me, I find this very important. So I'm a big soccer fan and a big board gamer. I make it a point to prioritize going to my soccer, football for you all, tailgates, spending time with my friends before and after the games, and that's a whole community for me, as well as playing games. take your vacation time. And this is a very American thing, is that we don't take our vacation time because we want to work too much. And find time to laugh, find time to have fun, and enjoy your life. I'm getting the wrap it up signal, which is good. I have 2 slides left. And finally, your relationships are really what matter. By having a good support system, by having a good community around you, you can help set goals. You can help with accountability. You can get support in very tough times. And this is something that I can attest to very strongly. So in 2018, within the course of 6 months, my husband left, my dog died, I lost my job, I fractured my rib, and I was rear-ended. My life was a bad country song. Every single thing in my life that could have gone wrong completely fell apart. And the only way I got through that was by having a support system and friends around me. And the great thing was, as life has been rebuilt and life has become better again, I've also had people to celebrate with me for a long, long time. So when we're talking about health, in general in our industry, we need more transparency and we need to have more empathy. The more we make it okay to discuss and prioritize caring for our health, the easier it is for everyone. And sometimes, like I said, the solution isn't answering a problem, it's just listening and empathizing and understanding. But by doing this and by talking about and prioritizing our mental and physical health, we're actually going to be able to make the technology industry happier and healthier and more productive as a whole. Thank you for your time. I am happy to take questions and answers now or in the hallway. You can find me on Twitter at Cassandra Faris. Please feel free to reach out. The whole reason this talk exists is because a different talk I was giving, people were asking me questions about mental health when I just mentioned it briefly in a talk. And so it's something that people want to talk about. Again, I'm not a therapist, but I'm happy to provide advice and just bring this conversation out in the open. And those are my dogs, and they're adorable. And that's it. So thank you for your time.